So the New York Times freelancer who basically wrote this piece, it was a 3-reporter piece. Geez, I forgot every single one of their names.
One of them
Schwartz, Jeffrey Gettleman.
Yeah, Jeffrey Gettleman is actually a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who basically is the new out of the 3 reporters here. He is the one who led the team here because the other 2 were freelancers who were brought on board specifically for this piece. And then the other individual who is at the center of this, it's Annette, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her name, Annette
Schwartz,
right?
Yeah,
so
her husband's nephew, I believe, is the other one.
Right, and he sort of matters the least, but still, the fact is that the New York Times went out of their way to get these 2 freelancers, who the husband's Annette Schwartz has no reporting experience, which
I didn't know until I read this article.
Yeah.
I was like,
on its own,
okay?
on its own, that's not an issue. I personally think anyone can do an act of journalism. If someone is somewhere and witnessed something and has a story to tell, they can be a journalist. There's no journalism license.
And I also don't think you need to go to journalism school if you're already in military intelligence. Because then you can, that's the thing. When you're in military intelligence, like school is out. You know what I mean?
I know you would go in that direction, right? But you actually
well, you can always trust military operatives in journalism. I think we all know this.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. So on its own, no big deal. Of course, the military operative thing makes it trustworthy. But this. Her inexperience combined with all the other issues, her clear biases, these
bias is a very charitable term for what she did.
Yeah, I mean, she liked a bunch of like Matt Lieb's just said, she has connections with the IDF.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she was in the tweets she liked were genocidal, literally. Like they were.
She liked very psychotic tweets.
The tweet said that they wanted to turn Gaza into a slaughterhouse, which you can read a few different ways.
Open for interpretation.
It's open for interpretation, right. I think.
She comes from a family of meat butchers. I don't know.
Exactly. She's just trying to get good cuts.
Open up a few businesses, right? Yeah.
Just because you're in an open air prison doesn't mean you can't try Kobe beef.
Right. You're right. So she went on this podcast, in this Israeli podcast, and it's completely in Hebrew, and she was very open in this podcast, and I assume that one of 2 things happened here. One, she just didn't give a shit. She was speaking with other Israelis in Hebrew, so and we all know, if you haven't previously been aware of this, but these past few months should have made you privy to it. Israel, its government, its politicians, its lawmakers, its spokespeople, they have a set of talking points for the West, the English-speaking audience, and a completely different set of talking points for the Israeli audience in Hebrew.
Yeah.
They often don't sound alike at all.
Yeah, if you hear anything in Hebrew, like press conferences or anything, if you're listening to it in English, just disregard literally everything they say in it, because whatever they're saying is just meant to appeal to a very specific type of American, just kind of either liberal, kind of like hard D Democrat, or a neoconservative or conservative. If you hear it in Hebrew, get the translation, because you're going to hear the wildest shit you've ever fucking heard in your life. Just casual genocidal language.
Right.
Yeah.
The audience for the English language stuff is John Fetterman post-stroke. So just let you all know where they're all going with this.
Yeah.
So she went on this podcast and she was very open on this report that the New York Times published. You might recall it came out, I believe it was in December, right? It was this big report that basically the angle, I don't know if anyone wants to pull up the headline for me while I break it down basically, but the angle, the crux of this report is that this is the definitive proof that systemic rape and sexual assault was perpetuated by Hamas on October 7th.
I should put just one little asterisk here, by the way. The term systemic is really, really important because, like, it's not as if there is no claims or people aren't agreeing that there wasn't horrifying atrocities committed on October 7th. You know, I know a lot of people tried to be like, well, this is discount everything. No, there's enough real horrifying atrocities that have occurred that you did not need to go to this extent to try and insinuate that there were things like literal babies being pulled out of the open wounds of pregnant mothers as they, like, you know, ripped them out and then beheaded them and then beheaded the mothers afterwards. Like, that part didn't need to be added, which is why the whole idea that there was a planned systemic rape being done, that was part of warfare is what's key, right? And that's a very big distinction.
Right. And obviously the difference, for people who don't quite get it, is that the exacerbated explanations of what exactly was done basically manufactures consent for Israel to do what it's been doing.
Hi, Rebecca.
There's a huge difference between, an attack where people die, people get killed, and then an attack in which people brutally behead, rape, do all put babies in ovens like we heard early on. There is a difference. I mean, yes, the end result is people die, but what you can get away with in your retaliation is dependent on what you have the public believe what happened to you to begin with. And
at least that's the goal.
Right, right. And so she's on this podcast talking about this piece that she was pretty much the main person behind. They put that Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times reporter with her basically to add, credence, like influence to it. And she's basically admitting on this podcast that they called a bunch of clinics, professionals in, sexual assault, rape counseling, things like that. And no one who works in this professionally could attest to a single person being raped on October 7th.
Not one, not a single account.
Not one, not a single place. So she basically says on this podcast that she needed to go out and find, because she couldn't believe it.
After the New York Times pressured her and had to convince her to write this story, by the way, just to kind of give that added context.
Right, right. And so what she ends up admitting to further in the podcast is that pretty much almost every account, if not every, I don't want to say exactly every because I don't recall every detail, but the majority, again, if not all, of the reporting she did is from secondary sources. Like, it's not like she found a bunch of witnesses. First of all, there is not a single person who came forward who they themselves was raped or sexually assaulted on October 7th. That individual, if they exist, has yet to come forward and is not quoted in this New York Times piece. So right then and there, the idea that you have the definitive proof this happened out the window.
Yeah,
again, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen. We don't know.
The Hezbollah,
but they're claiming that it.
Yeah.
They're claiming that it 100% happened, and it's in this report. Yet they haven't spoken to a single person that this happened to.
And I don't know if you guys remember, but when that was pointed out, when the article first came out, the Hezbollah around that was the reason that no one has come forward is because they are all dead. Every single person that was raped was then also killed, which is one of those things where, I mean, you have to understand that the entire premise, this whole thing, is poison pilled from the start. This is something that was put out there because to question it is just not accept it. It's just it's something that like no one wants to go through the fucking rigmarole of being the guy who's going to be like, I would like some evidence. Like you're going to get attacked for that, and they knew that. It was the same thing with the 40 beheaded babies, where they were like, "What you want to quibble about? You know how many babies were beheaded? Like no one wants to be that guy." So to even talk about it was to put you into an impossible position, which is, I think, the difference between a journalist and someone like Nat Schwartz. Like Nat Schwartz is a propagandist, and a journalist is someone who's like, I'm going to find out the facts of the matter. And I think that is more apparent now than ever.
Right, and I gotta address this in the chat here. So I don't know which chat this is in, but Absoluteless says, "Yup, people who are raped are famous for always coming forward." See, here's the thing. I get what you're saying there, of course. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but if you do not have a individual coming forward to say that this happened with, you know, proof, and again, if you're speaking to someone who had it happen to them, that's the proof. They don't need to show you anything. But you don't have that, then you don't have a fucking story. Right. As a reporter, you can't go by feelings or, oh, no one's coming forward, but I know this happened. That's not how journalism works. You don't have the definitive report that this happened if you do not have any of these details. They don't even have any proof this happened to the people who were killed because they refused to do the proper rape kits on people who were killed on October 7th, period. They just don't want to do the work. They just won't prove to anyone that this happened. This is stuff that this is like bare minimum. Right. This isn't like, oh, I'm a rape apologist or anything. No, this is bare minimum. If you're a reporter and you are saying this happened, you need to have this bare minimum. And they don't have it. They just don't have it. Again,
it's not a story of a single incident that happened. You know, there's a difference between saying like someone was raped on October 7th by a Hamas militant and saying that they are using rape systematically as a weapon of war. Like that's such a major claim that you do have to have some evidence of that. And that evidence has to be something that you put into the article. And to claim, like Jeffrey Gettleman did at this like panel he did with like Hillary Clinton and some other ghouls, like, no, I'm a journalist. We don't really do evidence. You know, we are. He said something along the lines of like, evidence is not, you know, the point. I wish I had the exact quote in front of me, but it was something where he basically admitted that like evidence, like what is evidence exactly? And if you're going to make that claim, you have to have it. You have to have evidence. And also to say like, oh, not everyone, you know, comes forward and whatnot. Like if the claim is a mass rape campaign happened, the fact is that you have to somehow back that up with something, or else you are just putting something out there. And I think that was kind of the point.
During Me Too, reporters published plenty of articles where they spoke to an individual who was making the claim of their first-hand account that something happened to them, and it could be anonymous. They didn't have to come forward and make their name public, but the reporter was able to corroborate that this did indeed happen to this anonymous individual, whom they're able to confirm they know who it is because they spoke with them. This person who wrote this New York Times piece couldn't even find someone to anonymously come forward and say that this happened to this anonymous person.
No, they even claimed that it happened to. They claimed that it happened to one person whose family then went public and said, "We told them what happened to our, I believe it was their daughter, but rape was not the thing that happened." They insinuated that, or if they may have even explicitly said it. So they even made up claims of rape, or at least one claim of rape was made up in that article. Period. They have
that family you're talking about. They have text messages from their, like I believe, like you said, their daughter, as this is going down with the time code there, as she's sending them the messages, and they said the time in which she's sending messages and the time that she is killed, there is simply not enough time for the things that this New York Times report claims happened to her could have happened.
Yeah. You got to take a broad view of this. The reason behind all of this stuff is more important than anything else. Because again, like in order to talk about this at all is to put yourself in a position where you sound like someone who is a rape apologist or a rape denialist.
But that's the point. That's why they do it. Because how you, if you try to actually get to the bottom or get to the truth of it, that's exactly how you sound. You sound like one of those, but that's what I'm saying. I would never make the claim that this did not happen. Yeah. Because we don't know. I'll believe it. But you can't definitively say this happened systemically, because it's just there's not proof of that. If you were to show me, like, if she was to come out and say, I've heard from a bunch of anonymous people who said this happened to them, you know what? Who am I to say that she didn't? But she doesn't even have that. She doesn't even have that.
I feel like there's no greater admission or nothing puts this more in context as to why they did this. Not just, the mass rape allegations, but also the beheaded babies. Nothing puts that more into context. If you want to understand it, look at a tweet that Anat Schwartz liked on October 9th. It's all in Hebrew. And it was translated as, "Our goal is to establish a narrative according to which Hamas is ISIS. This is a familiar contemporary sentiment that scares Westerners and not an organization of freedom fighters, and it has no contribution to free Palestine." You can write Nazis, but unfortunately it's a word that has lost meaning from it being used not only in Israel. So let's all stick like parrots to Hamas is ISIS. That is a tweet that she liked. And I think that is the goal. The goal there was we need to frame Hamas as not, we need to get rid of any narrative that they have that they're in some way oppressed or come from an oppressed people. We need to make them look like old school fucking anti-Arab racist caricatures. They are chopping off heads, they're killing babies, they're raping white women. And I think that is perfectly clear as to what they were trying to do as they were, leaking these stories bit by bit in the lead up to the war and during the war.
And these types of stories, they're necessary for propaganda purposes as well. This is manufacturing consent. I mean,
100%.
You could go back to the 90s, and then there was that testimony of the girl saying that she saw the babies taken out of incubators. There's, even when we were trying to coup Venezuela, there was this talk of, oh my God, they're eating rats on the street. These are meant to elicit a visceral reaction from people, so that way they consent to militarism, right? And they think, okay, you know what? If we're going to be really just go balls to the wall here and genocide Palestinians, then we have to cultivate support for it. And if the people can think that we're going up against barbarians, then they'll be okay with an equally proportionate response. So that's the goal. It's to get them to think these are not regular people like you and I. Like, these are savages. They're raping indiscriminately. They're doing all this. So it's a propagandistic tool. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
Which one? I'm kidding. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Bender.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Matt. Matt. Well, I'm going to reference Matt Lieb now. Matt, you mentioned earlier there was who are you quoting when you said they were just basically coming up with something, like they were just
the Hamas is ISIS thing?
Yeah.
That is
was that one of the tweets she liked?
That was a tweet liked by Anat Schwartz on October 9th. So 2 days after.
Okay. Because I wasn't sure if you were talking about what I was about to bring up. Because in this Intercept piece, they bring up how Schwartz in that podcast then goes on to say that she had, to source for this article, she spoke with this ultra-Orthodox organization called Zaka. Zaka. And you might remember them early on because they were the ones coming out as like the source for a lot of the first-hand accounts of what had happened in these various kibbutzes on October 7th. And it's since come out in this that basically they described their work. This is in the Intercept piece. The senior Zaka official said that this is how they did their work. Now, they're not trained forensic scientists or crime scene experts, the Intercept says.
Right.
And this is them quoting the senior Zaka official. When we go into a house, we use our imagination. The bodies were telling us what happened. That's what happened. They have no expertise in this.
Yeah,
They
which is
went
important when your job is being
Right.
literally a first responder. That's like
Right.
that's what Zaka is. So every time you see them, like CNN or any mainstream media say, according to first responders, know that they were quoting Zaka, and also that they're pretty open about how they do Hezbollah for a greater purpose, and that purpose is the mass exploitation and murder of Palestinians in this case.
To what you were talking about, Binder, when you were talking about how people are trying to frame this as like apologetics. I think the advocacy here is that this should be investigated. It's the same thing with what is the statistic in the UK? Like 1 in 100 rape cases actually goes to a trial and sees like a charge or conviction in the UK. It's because these things aren't being investigated. They should be. The same thing applies to so many other things that are happening in that region, where typically outside investigations where journalists are not allowed to see or even enter the area until like long after something has taken place. Like that's what I think everyone is calling for. That yes, you should look into this and find out what happened. And yes, of course there was atrocities that occurred on October 7th. No one's denying that. Why add the exaggerated ones to almost like discount the actual horrors and atrocities that did happen to civilians, when you're saying like 40 beheaded babies were slaughtered and this and that? Like, you are cartoonishly downplaying what actually happened, and for the purposes of obviously trying to justify all the fucked up shit you're doing later.
Right. No, absolutely. I'm not saying it didn't happen. In fact, I would believe that it could have possibly happened.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, if you are a reporter at literally the paper of record, the most influential publication on the planet, what you put in your paper is the official written history of that event in the New York Times.
Yeah. That's why I don't
If
read
you're going to
them
say
anymore.
that this is the definitive,
Yeah.
and you have nothing, then you failed. You
Yeah.
failed.
If you want to read a good paper, Epoch Times, they got all
They're
the
great.
they got all the facts, man. You know?
You know what? On Twitter, all they do is they created like dozens of accounts that they signed up to the creator monetization program.
Fuck yeah.
And they just constantly post like animal videos
Yeah.
in the replies of viral tweets, so they would get that like Twitter ad revenue.
Yeah.
So you know
God.
what?
So
If that's all
'cause
they're
they're
gonna
smart.
do, then you know what? Right.
Because they're smart.
Then they have done less damage than the New York Times.
Yeah. You could argue that. It's worth noting like that we would never have discovered any of this if there wasn't if there wasn't the Intercept, if there wasn't other publications out there that are actually trying to do real investigative reporting. It really showcases just how flawed, I guess, that's a nice way to put it, but places like the New York Times are, where they're unwilling to question largely held or long held beliefs that of course this makes total sense to us because this is the kind of shit we've been reporting forever. So as long as it doesn't buck what they're normally reporting, it seems they're unlikely to really look into this kind of reporting, as long as it continues a narrative that they've already been pushing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's the Intercept is amazing because it exists. It has been able to keep its credibility while doing stories that are real, which I know sounds like a low bar, but because you look at the media outlets, the independent media outlets that were talking about this first, like Mondo Weiss or like Electronic Intifada, these have been attacked constantly by Israel pro-Israel lobby groups for years, and so people just go, oh, well, they're just a bunch of cranks. And luckily, the Intercept exists in order to bolster the work that people at those publications, among others,
and they got rid of Glenn Greenwald. So it's kind of like how Vice got better after Gavin McInnes. So too did the Intercept.
Well, Vice no longer exists in the way they did, unfortunately.
They should have brought Gavin back.
Bad week for that example,
Saved
lads.
it.
Yeah.
Gavin. Bad timing.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Just
the
like
Intercept
just like
also
Vice,
did-
which just completely closed down altogether. It got better after Gavin McGinnis.
Yeah, the Intercept, we referenced this last week, but they did a report on the overall reporting. They looked at over 1,000 articles from the New York Times, the Washington Post,
That's right.
and they found that overall the language between reporting on Palestinian deaths and Israeli deaths was very, very different. There was a very big pro-Israel bias. For Israeli deaths, they use more emotive terms like slaughter, whereas with Palestinians, they use words like kill. Even describing minors.
Did you see the
where
one
it's like,
today with the people who died who were trying to get food, starving like people like slaughtered, and
Yeah.
that CNN was like what civilians killed in what is it like
Chaotic
excursion or
scene, is that
something?
what it was?
chaotic
Yeah.
chaos
Yeah.
unfolds or something. Yeah,
Chaos,
Jon Stewart
yeah.
called them out for that. Actually,
Yeah,
it's so
Jon
preposterous.
Stewart called it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so ridiculous.
Well,
Chaotic
when Palestinians,
incident. It was a chaotic incident. That was the exact
Right.
terminology.
Okay.
Chaotic incident.
when Palestinians die, it's it's just like a kerfuffle.
Yeah.
It's
just-
spontaneous. There's
it's
no
a
event.
whoopsie.
Yeah.
It's just
exactly.
like, oh no, what?
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
cause. Completely
No.
spurious. Yeah, it's dehumanizing, but I mean, it's not like we needed these reports to confirm it, especially with regard to the bias thing. But it's nice to just kind of see them quantify it because it makes you feel less crazy. Because you spot these things, you realize the differences in tone and language, and to see them actually confirm that this is indeed the case. Yeah, it's. I mean, the New York Times. I think it was Matt Leck who said that this is their worst blunder since the whole Iraq War bullshit. With Judy.
with Judith Miller. Yeah.
Miller. I was going to say Woodruff.
Judith
That's
Miller,
not
It's
Judy.
still up though. The story is still up, isn't it? Like
Oh, they're
taken it
standing
down.
behind
Is
it.
it?
They're defending her.
Right.
They're saying the
Yeah,
only thing she
right.
did wrong was like those tweets. Everything else
Yeah.
is fine. They stand by the reporter.
Well, listen, we've all been on podcasts where we've said, we've done a voice, so we've done an accent we shouldn't have done, we've, said some words that we thought were okay, like, genociding Palestinians is fine. Look at them die, lol. Like anyone can take that out of context. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
But what did she say before she admitted to the fact that nobody has actually claimed rape and that they had to find it through secondhand sources? Like, what happened on the other end of that?
She probably said, "This is what I would say if I weren't a credible journalist."
Yeah,
we
that's
had no
what she said.
evidence for our article. That's the context.
Yeah.
The thing too though is like the sourcing here in this report is from witnesses who were at like the music festival on October 7th, for example, who have spoken to Israeli state media, who've spoken to the IDF and have videotaped their things to put out there, and in every interview they give, their story changes. Something new is added. Something that they previously mentioned is completely a huge thing, like not like some side story. A huge part of their story is completely omitted in another. Like their stories change all over the place. And then on top of that, she didn't even go, the woman behind the New York Times article, Annette Schwartz, she didn't even meet with all of them and get quotes from them on her own to put in the New York Times. She is sourcing their accounts in other outlets.
Yeah.
Like, this is not what you do if you are claiming you have the definitive proof. Like, when I read this piece when it came out, I was like waiting for to come across, like you run in your opening, like in your nut graph, in your opening line, exactly everything you got.
Yeah.
Like you put forward right away exactly what you found out. And then you get more into detail as the piece goes on. And I'm reading through it and I'm like, there's not a single person, and they're claiming like the headline, the angling of it is like, this is it. We've got we've got the scoop.
Yeah.
And it's nothing I hadn't heard from people making claims online and sharing stories there.
Yeah, they didn't even bury the lead. They just implied that a lead existed. It's like it wasn't in there somewhere. You just waited the whole time, and you're like, wait, there's no first-hand account of it. And then again, it's all a rhetorical trap. To be like, hey, this seems fake. That is the purpose of this story. The purpose of it is to
who's
discredit
on team
anybody.
beheading babies. Who's on the other side of that? Who's on the beheading babies team? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember when
they're
that
beheading babies apologists.
I remember when that came out, and I was seeing people, look into it, and I was looking into it myself.
Yeah.
And it felt. You would read it and be like, this is what am I? I'm talking about how beheaded like you feel dirty almost,
right.
But it's like, but this is the truth. It didn't like, and then you find out that there weren't even 40 babies even there to kill to begin with. Like they just didn't like it's not even just they weren't beheaded. There weren't 40 babies killed.
Yeah,
like it just didn't happen. Not even close.
Yeah. And it was like. You could argue, and I'm sure someone already is or will be arguing that, like, listen, it was right after it happened. It was the fog of war. People were saying stuff, blah, 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 blah. But that all is a useless argument when you consider that literally the president repeated this lie.
Right.
Like, and this was the purpose of it.
It was a POV. It's like, I can't believe I saw, the
He didn't just say it.
You didn't.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so that argument, it was like, oh, people, it's just fog away. Like that doesn't hold water because the entire purpose of this was to get the fucking president to say shit like that. And he even said he saw it, which is a big lie. And then we go, oh, well, he's old. He has a stutter. So sometimes he just says,
that's why he lied.
Sometimes he just makes up entire
sometimes
scenarios.
when you stutter, you see beheaded babies in your head.
Yeah.